"We don't serve people like you," the ferry terminal supervisor barked, his voice echoing off the piers. 61-year-old Frank Donovan didn't argue. He simply produced his faded Navy ID, edges frayed, photo half bare. Nobody intervened. His small wooden launch, the Sea Whisper, was deemed not upscale enough for the newly privatized harbor, and they cast him aside. He hadn't expected red carpets, but neither did he expect bureaucratic cruelty so thick it might as well be deliberate. The harbor, once a workingman's haven, now shimmered with stainless steel yachts and cocktail decks trimmed in teak. Slender silhouettes in linen loafers roamed with lattes and lease contracts, while grizzled skippers like him disappeared from sight. Frank glanced at the tide board. He had timed everything perfectly, wind at his back, the school group arriving in 20 minutes. His vessel, cedar-planked and varnished with care, floated quietly at the edge of the dock like an old seabird, wings folded but ready. The supervisor looked past him, already speaking into his Bluetooth. "Yeah, old guy won't leave. Yeah, that junker. We're filing trespass." Frank held up the ID again, this time gently. "I've got the kids from Willow Ridge today. Teacher's name is Vega. Permissions on file." "Doesn't matter," the man snapped. "You're not on the approved mooring registry. The slip's been reassigned." He jabbed at a laminated placard bolted to the piling, Dock 9, reserved, charter elite only. So Frank did the only thing he could. He nodded once. Then he walked down to the Sea Whisper, undid the lines with the same precision he once used to secure rescue crafts in typhoon winds, and pushed off. As his boat cleared the dock, a seagull shrieked above the masts and Avery Lynn, a visiting ecologist reviewing shoreline erosion, lowered her GoPro, stunned, having just captured it all. Frank Donovan had not always been a man ignored. Once, he was Command Senior Chief Donovan, United States Navy, steadfast in posture, voice like calm thunder, and a mind sharpened by decades of saltwater decisions. He didn't command from behind a desk. He stood shoulder to shoulder with sailors during midnight storms and high-stakes rescues, where seconds separated life from oblivion. It started on a patrol cutter named Resolute, a lean vessel assigned to fast-response missions off the Gulf. He was 19, fresh-faced, with the ink still drying on his enlistment forms. Within 2 years, he'd volunteered for advanced coastal operations and was tapped for leadership, not because he demanded it, but because he listened. Frank had a way of hearing the tone beneath the words, the silence between signals. By 33, he was leading multinational rescue drills. The harrowing Category 5 event in 1992 still lived in the back of his mind. A cruise liner had lost power near the Florida Straits. The winds were apocalyptic. Frank coordinated 6 simultaneous hoist extractions by air, rescuing over 300 passengers. When it was over, soaked to the bone, he walked the deck checking on crew first, refusing dry clothes until every junior rating had theirs. His personal quarters remained modest, even aboard vessels that had upgraded over time. He kept a framed letter from a child he'd pulled from a sinking raft during a Caribbean humanitarian mission. Crayon-sketched boats and suns framed the child scrawled, "Thank you, you found us." Frank had taped it beside his bunk. Though his ribbon rack grew, Armed Forces Service Medal, Humanitarian Service Medal, Coast Guard Meritorious Unit Commendation, he never flaunted them. "The medal that matters is the one no one sees," he once told a young sailor. "The one you wear in how you carry yourself." During late career years, he led narcotics interdictions through dangerous shoals, navigating blind zones where GPS faltered. One Christmas Eve, after a 14-hour chase and a successful boarding of a smuggler's ship, he made cocoa on a camp stove and passed it out to his team under flares. His leadership style was quiet but fierce, disciplined yet deeply human. He taught ropework with stories, survival through song, and navigation by letting sailors fail safely. "Water always remembers," he'd say, drawing tidal currents into dirt with a stick, showing new recruits how to read what charts couldn't show. Frank retired with distinction at age 54. No scandals. No headlines. Just handshakes and tears, a final salute from an admiral who said only, "The sea is safer because you were in it." But the safety he once provided seemed to vanish when he returned home to Marsh Haven. The town where he grew up, once a humble grid of crab shacks, marine supply shops, and weather-worn fishermen, had begun its renaissance. Real estate brochures now called it the Hamptons of the South. A wine bar replaced the old tackle shop. Slip fees doubled. The Sea Scout building where Frank volunteered was bulldozed for a spa. Still, Frank stayed. He bought a small inlet cottage, repaired it himself, and carved out his new mission: teach maritime skills to any kid willing to learn. He noticed many came hungry or quiet from homes tangled in hardship. He gave them knots, rudders, radios, and more importantly, trust. Every Saturday, he welcomed them aboard the Sea Whisper, his hand-built cedar and oak launch, 28 feet of floating resilience. He taught them to track stars, to chart tides, to listen to gull cries for weather signs. Frank's lessons didn't stop at the edge of the dock. He patched school shoes, handed out homemade sandwiches, paid for field trip coats out of pocket. When one boy confided that he couldn't swim, Frank returned the next day with a donated life vest and a promise: "No sailor of mine gets left behind." It didn't go unnoticed. The old guard, former shrimpers, coast guardsmen, widows of fishermen, loved Frank. But the new crowd, the luxury developers and yacht-class crowd, dismissed him. One harbor administrator referred to him as that salty holdover with a charity complex. To Frank, it didn't matter. He'd learned long ago that service didn't require applause. But it stung nonetheless the day he found a neon-orange non-compliant vessel sticker slapped across his bow. The reasons listed? Aesthetic mismatch with harbor standards. Outdated materials. Excessive wear. He peeled it off without a word and got back to sanding a splinter from the Sea Whisper's gunnel. The kids were coming that Saturday. He had stories to prepare. The marina didn't change overnight. It crept in slowly, the way tides swallow sandbars, inch by inch, silent until gone. Marsh Haven's transformation began with a glossy development pamphlet. Then came the boutique hotels with reclaimed wood facades, craft seafood restaurants with artful portions, and dock and dine incentives for boaters with deeper hulls and deeper pockets. Frank watched it all like a lighthouse watching a storm roll in, helpless but observant. At first, the changes were cosmetic. The town painted lampposts navy blue. Then came branding consultants who suggested Marsh Haven's charm needed polish. The fishing mural on the marina wall, painted by school kids a decade earlier, was whitewashed and replaced with a steel plaque: Marsh Haven Marina, where prestige meets the sea. The small harbor master's shack was replaced with a marble-tiled visitor center offering espresso and yacht charter brochures. Frank's berth, once central and easily accessible for the children's groups he ferried, was moved to the farthest edge of the harbor, next to the fish processing plant where the stench of diesel and brine lingered like a second skin. No explanation. No appeal process. Just an email stating, "Due to updated usage tiers, your vessel has been reassigned to slip G14. It wasn't just the relocation. One morning, he arrived to find his electrical hookup disconnected. His small solar inverter, carefully mounted, legal by all standards, was marked with a red zip tie and a typed warning, "Unauthorized modification." He walked to the new harbor office to inquire. A receptionist, barely out of college, looked up from her tablet and said flatly, "We're phasing out older vessels. They don't meet our aesthetic alignment." Aesthetic alignment. Frank had heard a lot of euphemisms in the Navy. Operational delay meant someone had screwed up. Voluntary separation meant someone was pushed out. But aesthetic alignment was new. It meant, you don't look like us. You don't belong here anymore. Still, he said nothing. He patched the Sea Whisper's hull himself that week. A keel rib had warped in the winter chill, and he couldn't afford a marina-approved contractor. So he worked by moonlight, hands stained with resin, refusing to let the vessel fall into disrepair. But the attacks became more pointed. The town council announced a new, Blue Ribbon initiative, aimed at improving waterfront harmony. Frank's program, teaching seamanship to underprivileged youth, was omitted from the marina's new activity roster. Instead, space was given to paddleboard yoga and a champagne brunch cruise featuring artisanal fishing tales. Ms. Sophia Vega, a fifth-grade teacher from Willow Ridge Elementary, wrote letters. She spoke at a public hearing. She reminded them that her students, many of whom had never even seen the ocean, counted down the days to Captain Frank's outings. That the kids brought home stories, diagrams of tides, and a respect for nature they never got from textbooks. Her words were met with polite nods and empty smiles. One council member even whispered to another, thinking she couldn't hear, "She means well, but that program's just a photo op waiting to go wrong." Meanwhile, the Sea Whisper kept floating. Frank polished her nameplate weekly. He installed new child-size life jackets. He created a floating library, waterproof bins filled with adventure books and nautical tales. Every student who completed his 3-week course got to sign a logbook and carve their initials beneath the gunwale. That cedar beam was now filled with tiny letters and numbers, etched memories that even tide couldn't erase. But as summer neared, the pressure mounted. Marina staff began random inspections. They cited him for minor things, a cracked fender, a misplaced safety flare. One day, he arrived to find the gate access code changed. No warning. No notice. He waited in the rain for nearly 2 hours before someone let him in. That evening, he received a letter in a sleek white envelope. It bore the marina's new crest, a minimalist wave design, and an embossed watermark that smelled of cologne. Dear Mr. Donovan. Effective immediately, your vessel has been classified as a non-compliant watercraft per Harbor Code 7B. This determination is based on a combination of structural, visual, and service criteria. You are instructed to vacate slip G14 within 5 business days to avoid administrative penalties. Please refer to the enclosed guidelines for alternative berthing options in outlying facilities. Sincerely, Marsh Haven Marina Administration. There were no alternative options listed. Frank didn't get angry. He got quiet. He sat at his kitchen table, the envelope before him, and sipped cold coffee. Then he stood, reached for the weathered duffel bag that had followed him through 3 deployments, and began sorting through navigation charts, logbooks, and laminated lesson plans. Outside, gulls circled over the inlet, indifferent to ordnance changes and aesthetic visions. And still, he prepared for Monday. The kids from Willow Ridge were scheduled for a morning sail. They'd been counting on it for weeks. Monday morning came painted in gold. The sun rose slow over the breakwater, brushing the sky with streaks of tangerine and slate. Frank arrived at the marina an hour before the kids. It was a ritual. He checked the Sea Whisper stem to stern, rigging, bilge, flare kit, life jackets arranged by size, compass reset. The wind was calm, just enough to fill a sail and tug the mind toward somewhere better. Slip G14 was empty when he arrived. Not of boats, there were yachts and catamarans trimmed in chrome and mahogany, but empty of regard. A passing dockhand gave him a look, not hostile, just vacant, like he'd forgotten Frank had a name. Frank offered a nod anyway. The nod was not returned. He carried down a small duffel containing lunch bags Ms. Vega had prepared for the kids, PB&J with tangerines, all sealed tight. He stored them in the small cooler below deck. On the cedar table beside the helm, he laid out the day's teaching materials, laminated diagrams of coastal tides, hand-drawn weather maps, a photo of a pilot whale he'd taken near Shoal Point, and a chart labeled, "Know Your Knots." The lines were already cut and coiled, bowline, clove hitch, figure 8. At 9:03 a.m., he spotted them at the edge of the dock, Miss Sophia Vega in her sun hat, clipboard in hand, leading 12 fourth graders in neon life vests and wide-eyed anticipation. Most of them had never left the city, let alone floated on open water. This trip wasn't just a break from school, it was their first step into a world beyond pavement. "Good morning, Captain Donovan," Ms. Vega called, smiling as she shepherded the kids toward the gangway. He tipped his cap, the faded navy crest barely legible but still proud. He started to toss the first mooring line across. "Stop right there," barked a voice behind him. Frank turned. It was the supervisor, a different one than usual, younger, cleaner cut, with mirrored sunglasses and a clipboard. He walked briskly, two marina security staff trailing behind him. "This isn't your berth anymore," the supervisor declared, gesturing toward the dock as if it were freshly paved gold. "Slip G14 is now assigned to a charter affiliate. You need to vacate." Frank stood still, both feet planted firmly on the sun-bleached wood. "I'm registered under the community program with the school. That was approved by the board last fall. Kids are here for a sail." The man didn't blink. "That program's been sunset. You've been notified." He tapped the clipboard once. "We have brand standards here. We don't serve people like you." Ms. Vega, startled, stepped forward. "Excuse me, that's completely inappropriate. He's with Willow Ridge Elementary, this is our field day, coordinated through the district. You have the paperwork." The supervisor didn't even glance her way. "This is private property. He needs to leave." One of the security men spoke into a radio, voice low. The other placed a hand on his belt, resting on a keyring, though the gesture was unmistakably one of dominance. A seagull shrieked overhead, as if trying to interrupt the moment. The children stood silently, clutching their life jackets. One boy whispered, "Why are they being mean to the captain?" Frank didn't look at the security team or the supervisor. He looked at the kids, at Ms. Vega, and at the water, which reflected the morning sky in broken shards. Then he simply nodded. "I understand," he said, voice level. "Kids, I'm sorry about today. I hope you still find the sea." He turned, stepped onto the Sea Whisper, and began to untie the dock lines. Ms. Vega moved to protest again, but Frank shook his head slightly. "Not here. Not now." From the opposite end of the pier, a woman watched, young, sharp-eyed, clutching a travel mug and a slim gray camera in one hand. Avery Lynn, an ecologist doing a seasonal study on shoreline erosion, had been setting up her GoPro for an interview about salt marsh degradation. But when she saw what unfolded, she instinctively tilted the lens and hit record. She didn't understand the whole context, just enough to know she was witnessing something wrong. Something ugly dressed in khakis and logo shirts. The camera caught everything, the stiff posture of the security men, the clipped tone of the supervisor, the quiet dignity of an old sailor untying his boat while a dozen confused children stood behind a railing. It captured Frank easing the Sea Whisper away, turning the motor on low idle, passing silently out of frame. When he reached the inlet's edge, Frank glanced back. Ms. Vega still stood by the gangway, one hand on a student's shoulder. Avery lowered the camera slowly. She didn't say a word. She just uploaded the footage that afternoon with a simple caption. "They said he didn't belong. But you don't throw away the people who taught you how to sail." The clip was 37 seconds long. By morning, it had over 200,000 views. The video caught fire like dry canvas to flame. By noon the next day, the 37-second clip had crossed 1 million views. Hashtags surfaced in waves, hashtag Sea Whisper, hashtag Honor Frank, hashtag Forgotten Sailor. People from every coast reposted it, activists, educators, veterans, even boaters who'd never set foot in Marsh Haven. The clip was dissected across social media. Frame by frame, viewers saw it, the unflinching stillness of Frank's hands as he untied the Sea Whisper, the way the marina supervisor's words curled with smugness, the disbelief on the children's faces. One user wrote, "The quietest man in the video had the loudest dignity." Within hours, comments flooded in. Senior Chief Donovan taught me to tie my first bowline knot at age 9. He pulled me out of a rip current when I was 6. Didn't even tell my mom it was him. Used to see him cleaning oil off seabirds by hand after storms. Frank Donovan taught 3 of my foster boys to swim. All of them went Navy. But the comment that changed everything came from a high-ranking account, verified and sparingly used. Vice Admiral Marcus Reyes. He wrote only. Location confirmed. Situation noted. Deploying remembrance protocol. Minutes later, the Admiral posted a black and white photo. Grainy, taken from a helicopter. A rescue in high seas. On the slick metal deck, 2 figures, one hunched in a blanket. The other in uniform, arm braced around the injured man, barking orders toward the wind. "That's me. That's your senior chief," the caption read. "He pulled me from the Gulf in '92. I was 24, scared out of my mind." He didn't flinch. He handed me a blanket and said, "You're not done yet, sailor." I wouldn't be alive, let alone serving, if not for Frank Donovan. The ripple turned tidal. By nightfall, national outlets picked up the story. Network anchors with rehearsed empathy described the disgrace at a gentrified harbor. Footage of Frank silently sailing away played alongside archival clips, storm rescues, naval awards, letters from school districts. The Sea Whisper became a symbol. A floating contradiction to every soulless policy. A coalition of veterans organizations released a joint statement. When bureaucracy forgets its soul, it falls to those who remember. Senior Chief Donovan exemplifies the values we claim to honor: integrity, service, humility. We stand with him. Sailors past and present began stitching yellow cords on their caps, an unofficial tribute, modeled after the ropework Frank had used to teach kids. One post read, "Not regulation, but neither was he." Hashtag Donovan's Knot. Maritime School sent offers, honorary teaching fellowships, guest lectures. He declined each, gently, through Ms. Vega, saying he had plenty to teach right where he was. Pressure mounted on Marsh Haven's administration. Reporters appeared at town meetings. Petitioners surrounded the harbor in a ring of protest kayaks. Even the marina's sponsors, luxury boat brands, travel companies, began to withdraw. One rep bluntly stated, "We didn't sign on to shame heroes." Still, Frank remained silent. No press, no statements. He kept to his routine, visiting the inlet each morning, mending old sails, feeding gulls from a pouch of dry bread. But those close to him knew he felt the weight, not as pride, but as responsibility. He'd never asked for recognition. Just a space to serve. Then came the letter. It arrived unceremoniously in his mailbox. A thick cream envelope, hand-delivered and sealed with gold insignia. Inside, a formal declaration from the Navy Office of Public Affairs, authorized by the Chief of Naval Operations. Request for honors ceremony, recipient, Senior Chief Francis Donovan, Ret. Location, Marsh Haven Harbor. Purpose, acknowledgement of lifetime service, community impact, and restoration of public trust. It was signed by Admiral Reyes himself. Frank didn't respond immediately. Instead, he visited the Sea Whisper, running his hand along the cedar rail, pausing at each child's carved initials. He stared at the water. Thought about storms. About knots. About what it meant to hold fast when tides turned against you. A week later, 6 naval vessels appeared on the horizon. No announcement. No advance PR. Just a line of gray silhouettes slicing through morning mist, flanked by Coast Guard cutters and 2 tugboats. The harbor grew quiet. Locals lined the docks. Tourists peered from hotel balconies. No one spoke. From the lead vessel, a launch boat detached, its flag snapping in the breeze. Aboard stood Vice Admiral Reyes in full-dress whites, flanked by officers, medals gleaming like second suns. As the launch approached, a lone voice called out. Captain Donovan. Frank stood on the pier beside Ms. Vega and a group of wide-eyed children. He wore his old pea coat and the navy cap that had seen 3 decades of wind. He saluted. Crisp. Precise. The kind of salute that made even the marina's luxury guests stand taller. The admiral stepped onto the dock. Senior Chief, he said, extending his hand. Frank took it. Reyes continued, his voice resonating without microphone. For gallantry in the face of storms, for unyielding service in quiet harbors, and for showing us the measure of honor, this is your slip, your town, your legacy. Cheers erupted. Not polite applause, but something deeper. Applause that cracked open the ribs. Veterans wept. Kids jumped and waved. Reporters fumbled to capture what couldn't fit in sound bites. Behind them, sailors disembarked. They began repainting the weather-worn benches. Volunteers joined. Someone rolled out a banner. Veterans and children sail free, Captain Frank's code. The Sea Whisper was remoored at her original berth, Dock 9, her lines secured with fresh hitch knots tied by the Admiral himself. Marina staff cleared their offices quietly over the next few days. The branding consultants canceled their contracts. In their place came seafarers, teachers, and school groups. Avery Lynn, the ecologist whose video started it all, was invited to speak at a community forum. She brought no speech, just a quote Frank had once mumbled when asked why he still taught kids to sail. Because if you don't show them the water, how will they know how to save it? And somewhere at the back of the room, Frank listened. Not for applause. Not for revenge. Just to know the sea was, once again, within reach for those who needed it most. The town tried to return to normal. But something had shifted, not just a scandal resolved or a wrong corrected, but a current redirected. Frank Donovan had never asked Marsh Haven for anything except space to serve. Now, the town gave it freely. 3 days after the naval ceremony, the mayor held an emergency vote to review the harbor's leasing policies. It passed unanimously. Slip fees for educational and non-profit vessels were permanently waived. The ban on non-aesthetic watercraft was repealed, the language struck from every sign and brochure. One glossy print ad for the marina had already gone to press with the phrase, "Where prestige meets the sea." It was pulped and replaced with a new slogan, "Where service anchors the soul." On the first Saturday following the ordinance change, Frank stood at the helm of the Sea Whisper, her hull freshly oiled and glowing like a warm ember in the morning sun. At his side stood Ms. Vega and 2 teenage students, former pupils, now volunteer instructors. The dock bustled with parents, kids, local reporters, and volunteers from the nearby naval base. All the life that had been siphoned away from Marsh Haven's heart had returned in a single tide. They launched a new program, the Marsh Haven Maritime Initiative, offering free weekend boating lessons to underserved youth. Funded by private donations, surplus Navy support, and community efforts, the program expanded quickly. Kids from across the county now made pilgrimages to Slip 9. The waiting list doubled in a month. Inside the marina's restructured welcome center, the front desk displayed 3 framed photographs. Frank standing beside a group of students on the Sea Whisper. Vice Admiral Reyes saluting Frank with the ship's information behind him. A still from the viral video, Frank, quiet and composed, casting off as children watched. Below it read, "Character is doing the right thing when nobody salutes you for it." Veterans across the country made their way to Marsh Haven. Some just came to stand by the plaque at Dock 9. Others offered guest lectures to the kids, or brought memorabilia from their own service to create a small maritime museum. Sailors installed a brass ship's bell beside the bench Frank often used. Every Saturday at noon, a student was selected to ring it in honor of someone they admired. On the second week of the program's relaunch, a surprise visitor arrived, an older man in a battered baseball cap, sleeves rolled to the elbows, leaning on a cane. He waited quietly at the dock until Frank spotted him. "Lloyd," Frank said, a flicker of surprise in his voice. "You're a long way from Norfolk." Lloyd Carmichael had served under Frank decades earlier during cold water extractions off the Alaskan coast. He didn't say much, never had, but the two men shared a silent clasp of hands. Then Lloyd reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet of yellowed paper, an official Navy commendation, dated July 1993, signed by Frank himself. "I was lost before that mission," Lloyd said, his voice cracked from salt and time. "You didn't just pull me out of that raft. You showed me what a man looks like when he holds the line for everyone else." Frank nodded, then gestured toward a group of students practicing with coils of rope. "You got time to teach a half-hitch?" Lloyd smiled. "Always." More than teaching, Frank mentored. He trained the next generation of instructors, older students who once learned aboard Sea Whisper and now passed it forward. One of them, 17-year-old Marcellus Grant, was the first to complete the full 2-year seamanship program. On graduation day, he presented Frank with a gift, a carved wooden compass rose, inlaid with brass. Around the rim were the initials of every student who had ever learned aboard Sea Whisper. Hundreds. In an interview with the local paper, Marcellus said, "Mr. Donovan taught us the ocean doesn't care where you're from or what your name is. But if you respect her, she'll teach you how to survive." That's what he gave us, survival. And direction. The town cafe, formerly a wine bar that once posted a "No Children, No Pets" sign, was under new ownership. The new proprietor, a Navy widow named Nadine Alvarez, painted a new sign above the door. "Frank's Galley, Veterans and Kids Eat Free." Inside, hand-painted portraits of the Sea Whisper and past crews adorned the walls. No menu item cost more than $10. Avery Lynn returned to the town to visit once more. She stood quietly at the end of the dock, watching a group of children hoist a makeshift sail for the first time. Frank joined her. "I still don't know why I hit record that day," she said. "You saw a moment worth saving," he replied. She paused. "Do you think it would have mattered, if I hadn't?" Frank looked out at the water, now dotted with skiffs and training vessels bearing the Marsh Haven Maritime Initiative flag. "Maybe," he said. "But sometimes the tide needs a push." Weeks later, the mayor signed an ordinance officially renaming the harbor Veterans Cove Pier. A bronze plaque was mounted at Slip 9. A nation is measured by how it honors those who safeguarded its shores. In honor of Senior Chief Frank Donovan and all who served quietly and faithfully. Frank declined all monetary offers, stipends, honorary grants, restoration budgets. Instead, he created a scholarship fund for students pursuing marine sciences or naval service. The fund's name was simple, the Sea Whisper Fund. And though Frank continued to teach every weekend, he grew quieter in public. Not out of shyness, but satisfaction. His legacy was in the knots tied with confidence, the children who spoke of the sea like it was their home, the strangers who left Marsh Haven a little kinder. He spent his evenings on the porch of his inlet cottage, a place where gulls still called, and the tide still came in with grace. Some nights, he wrote in his log. Others, he just sat. And when the light faded and the last skiff returned to dock, Frank would whisper to the horizon, same words each time. It's about remembering who we want to be. Honor held fast.